Okay, I'll kickstart things. Welcome to the latest panel discussion in our Women in DevOps webinar series, How Software Engineers Can Utilize DevOps Best Practices. I just have to do a little bit of housekeeping and let everybody know that everybody is muted upon entry, but we want to make this webinar as engaging as possible. So please feel free to put your questions into the chat box and I will try to have our panelists answer as many of your questions as possible. We might have to leave some to the end, and of course we might not be able to answer every question. We will be running a live networking session following the panel discussion though, so you might have an opportunity to ask some of our panelists if they're also signing in any questions that weren't answered. So yeah, that should be pretty straightforward. I am Francesca, I'm the co-founder of Women in DevOps, and I'll be chairing our panel discussion this evening. We established Women in DevOps in 2017 specifically to address the issue of gender imbalance in the DevOps and tech industry. Our aim is to help close the gender gap by empowering women to create innovative solutions, encourage organizations to retain women into their tech communities, and to promote gender equality. We are so incredibly proud of how far our community has come, and we now have 4,000 followers globally. To continue driving our community forward, we have recently launched a corporate partnership model. So if you are interested in being a partner of Women in DevOps, then please reach out to us, which also brings me to introduce to you Ari Waller from JFrog, who has a super exciting announcement to make with regards to a sponsorship.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I really appreciate that. I'm going to see if I can just share my screen here really quick. Let's see if I did that right. Can everyone see my slide? Yes? Okay, great. Well, we're just like Francesca said, we're just so excited. My name is Ari Waller, and I am the Meetup event manager at JFrog, and we're just ecstatic really about the new platinum sponsorship. The platinum sponsorship opportunity we have to partner with Women in DevOps. I know Lauren and I and Lucy have been discussing this for a while, and we're just really excited to see what the rest of 2020 and beyond really have with this partnership. So thank you so much for allowing us into your community. This is just really awesome. Like I said, I work for JFrog, and for those of you who don't know what JFrog is a software company. We're actually based in the Silicon Valley, and we're best known to the world through our DevOps software. If you haven't heard of JFrog, you may have heard about Artifactory, which is used by many corporations around as the leading universal binary repository. So today, we were established in 2008, but we've grown ever since, and today we have 600 employees, called Frogs, at 10 different global offices. We have over 6,000 customers, and more than 3 million developers use our tools daily in the DevOps world. So just very excited to be introduced to you in that respect. Now, as it relates to the slide, one of the things that I like best about my job at JFrog as a Meetup event manager is I get to bring good news and happiness to the world by giving out prizes. So some months are going to have bigger prizes than other. For example, our next meetup, we are going to have a Nintendo Switch Lite that we're going to be giving out to everybody. But today, as an introduction, we wanted to do something really special. So what we did, we do have an Amazon Echo that we're going to be giving away. And what I'm going to do in just a few moments is I'm going to share a link in the chat box for you to go in and register to be a winner of an Amazon Echo. But there are no losers today, because just because you enter the raffle, you are going to get a JFrog Iron Frog t-shirt, which I am happy to model for you. I'll pick it up here. And of course, you see it on the slide as well. And if you saw Lauren's introduction to our sponsorship, she was wearing one also. So I'd love to see everyone get one. So we're just really excited about the partnership, and so excited to see what everything, the panel discussion and what that is going to entail this evening. So thank you so much, Francisca, for that. And I really appreciate it. We'll look forward to the rest of the evening.
Thanks, Ari. Hopefully next time I'm hosting a webinar, I'll be in one of the JFrog t-shirts too.
Absolutely. I insist. There you go. Bye-bye.
So now I'm going to introduce our speakers to everybody. So Jeremy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, finding the mute button. Hi everyone, I'm Jeremy Burns. I'm the head of software engineering for News UK. News UK is known for its publications, so that's the Times newspaper, the Sunday Times, the Sun newspaper, and a bunch of radio stations like Virgin Radio, Talk Sport, Talk Radio, and we've just released Times Radio as well. Yeah, that'll do for now, I think.
Brilliant. Michelle? Have we lost them there, Michelle?
She looks frozen.
I know, we seem to...
Was it me? Sorry, I'm back. I just switched Wi-Fi networks. Hi everyone, I'm Michelle. I'm a software engineer at Condé Nast in London. Am I unstable? Is my connection okay?
Good, we're good.
I'm good, okay. So I'm a software engineer at Condé Nast in London, so I work on the websites for brands like Vogue, GQ, Bon Appetit, etc. And I'm a product engineer or a feature engineer, which means I don't specifically work on infrastructure, but I'm hoping to bring the perspective of someone who is not coming from like a cloud platform team, but I dabble and I try to learn and do what I can. Yeah, that's me.
Amazing. And Tamara?
Hi, so I'm Tam, and I'm an engineering manager at Improbable, and I've been here for exactly a month today, so I don't have all of the answers with regard to Improbable quite yet, but basically we build a lot of services specifically for games as well as some different stuff. And we have some internal studios like Midwinter Entertainment. And we also, so I work with partner engineering, which is specifically to integrate with, help other game studios, which most of whom are very exciting, but I can't really talk about, that help them integrate with our tech, which is pretty cool. So they can build new generations of video games, basically. My background before this, I worked at Riot Games as well as a startup in London. So I've been in London for about 3 years. And my background is basically 13 years or so of varying online services, some video games, some not. And yes, I'm hoping to talk about some of the many different flavors of DevOps and infrastructure today.
Amazing. Well, I know, Tam, you just touched upon it a little bit, but I think a good place for us to start is looking at how your different teams are set up in your organization, and do you have specific teams that build infrastructure? And if so, how do your feature developers interact with these teams? I don't know who wants to answer that first.
You go.
I was going to say, like, I'm still kind of learning the org structure because it's interesting at Improbable because we have 3 internal game studios. And so some of them use central tooling. So we have teams that run that. We also just acquired a company called Zeus that's based in Germany, and they do a hybrid model of bare metal as well as more containerized infrastructure. So it's really interesting because obviously, like, that's a very new acquisition. So working on integrating that with our platform teams in London and globally, because our, one of our studios is actually in Seattle, is really quite interesting. And I think one of the ways that I know at least my team is involved with getting that information back to feature teams and kind of working with infrastructure is actually that we are that glue in between, because we're helping with integration between game studios and platform and infrastructure. So, but we're also trying to make sure that we remove the kind of middleman, so to speak, as much as possible. So we're enabling other people, other teams to do self-serve as much as possible, and automation. Yeah, I'll stop talking now.
I'll tell you about us. So we've been on the web since the very late 90s. I wasn't there then, of course. So we have, in fact, we still have a data center that serves some of our bigger corporate systems and some of our editorial systems. But we are in the middle of a program to completely move that into the cloud. But then the backdrop to that is that all of our apps and our websites that we build that are consumer facing, they're all in the cloud and have been for a long time. We nominally go multi-cloud, but really we're AWS. And for me, the interesting part is that we have feature teams, feature engineers who are building things. And we also do have some engineers who are expert at, Kubernetes and all those good things. And very much we let those guys sit and set everything up, but then that's a platform that everybody else can use. And when I hire for a DevOps and a TDD mindset. I want engineers who can write really good code, but test it first, and then know how to put it into production and how to maintain it and look after it when it's there. So one of the themes of this evening is really that integration and that merging, and how the specialist role will almost become smaller because everyone will be able to do everything.
Yeah, so similar to Jeremy and Tamara, at Condé Nast, everyone is encouraged to embrace a DevOps mindset and not see a distinct us and them separation with the cloud infrastructure engineers. However, we do have a couple of cloud platform specific teams that are separate from more feature and product development teams, which I'm on. And so the idea is that the cloud platform teams, they build the framework and the core infrastructure that we as feature developers are then encouraged to own and take responsibility for and iterate on as much as possible. So one of those cloud platform teams is called Lighthouse, and the idea is that they are the port of call, and their purpose is to help the feature developers to achieve their infrastructure and cloud goals. So if, for example, I want to set up an S3 bucket and I need to do that in infrastructure as code, I can go to the Lighthouse Clinic, schedule time with them, and they will pair with me to get that done. So it's more like we're partners with the cloud platform teams rather than throwing it over a fence. And I know we'll probably talk a bit about this later, but we also have a site reliability engineering team, which once again, the idea is that they are partners in ensuring the reliability of our platforms rather than a separate operations team that we don't speak to or interact with.
I actually, sorry, if I could just jump in really quick. I completely forgot to mention that we operate on the cloud. So a big part of what we do is on both Google Cloud Platform and AWS. So I can't believe I forgot to mention that. And also we are talking right now about ramping up live ops quite a bit because we're preparing to launch our first internal game. So that's kind of a big deal. And I know one of the things that we're going to be talking about later is that shift in mindset from while you're in development to actually getting to the production way of thinking about things like live ops and DevOps. And yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. You're muted.
I've done it. It's the first time I've done that, isn't it? Hopefully I won't do that again throughout the rest of the panel. So in terms of your teams then, how do you best manage the transition from being in purely infrastructure roles into that broader engineering development side of things? Yeah,
I'll take that one first. So it's something I think about a lot because if I go back I'm very old, so I can remember when we would have a data center and there was a team of people who would provision servers, which meant everything from buying them and putting them in the rack and all that thing. And a new server would take 3 or 4 months to arrive so you could use it. We're now in a completely different world where a developer just writes some infrastructure as code, they spin it up, there's suddenly a container up and it's running and in production. So I see that there's a shrinking gap between those experts and everybody else who can just write really good code and get it out there. So when I hire people, so I've just put a couple of grads, for example, into our cloud engineering team, but very much their drive is to learn how to be really, really good at DevOps, and which is, we'll talk a lot about more, I'm sure. But then to go and join an engineering team that are building out features, to bring with them all of that really good DevOps experience and knowledge, to sort of evangelize those good best practices, and then also to become engineers. And that's a trend I would like to see. So, you know, everyone can do everything pretty much. But to your point, Michelle, there are specialists who sit there and do site reliability engineering and set up the basic environment that I wouldn't expect everyone to know. So, you know, that gap is closing. I see people morphing and moving around and becoming multi-talented and able to take on pretty much everything rather than being specialists.
That's interesting that you've had people come starting out in infrastructure and then moving into feature development, because I haven't really experienced it in that way or seen it happen that way. So we do rotations at Condé where people can spend 3 months with the site reliability engineering team, or I had a colleague who spent 3 months on the cloud platform team. And that was really cool because when they came back to my team, whenever we had an infrastructure task, they were all over it, and it was amazing. So I saw firsthand how doing rotations and cross-pollinating was extremely useful. But I would say also that the site reliability engineering team is sort of like the bridge between the cloud platform teams and the feature development teams. And some of the engineers who moved from cloud platform to site reliability engineering were able to learn more about running a node application, things like that, which they, in a more development-y, web development-y kind of way, which they probably didn't have the opportunity to do as much.
So site reliability is really interesting because I see that they benefit from engineers doing really good monitoring and alerting and observability and putting all of that good stuff in place, which is good practice. That makes the job of their site reliability engineer better and easier. And equally, site reliability is sitting there with eyes on what's going on, and they can raise the right teams to fix some stuff in production really quickly too.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that, you know, there's always trade-offs between like specialists and generalists. And I think, you know, if you are looking at the site reliability engineers as like the traditional Google approach, which most companies don't have the resources available or the number of engineers available that they do. And I think like a lot of what their focus on is quite like those site reliability engineers do all of that stuff. And so then feature engineers aren't doing as much with monitoring and like observability and stuff like that, which I firmly believe that they should be, because I think every engineer needs to be a bit well-rounded when it comes to things like security and scalability and understanding how to tweak performance in their own feature. And if they don't understand some of that stuff, or you know how it works on their particular infrastructure, whether that's completely in the cloud or some sort of hybrid model or bare metal, like they're going to be doing some sort of disservice to their customers or users at some point, because they're going to miss something, you know, which I'm sure we'll share the things about specific stories at some point, but
yeah, and if you think back, testing used to be something that another team did, and an engineer would get to a certain point and throw it over the wall, and now it's somebody else's problem. And I think we have been there with site reliability, if you will. An engineer will get to a certain point and just throw it over the fence. Now it's your problem, and both of those walls are falling down very fast.
Yeah, I think like there's still a few scenarios that it might make sense to have that specialist. Like I think especially in games, this is true, where QA, like we want to automate as much as possible, but there are still some things that, you know, when you're testing a video game visually, you're not going to be able to do that in an automated way very well. So like there is still some room for that, but I would say like, I completely agree. Otherwise, like outside of their very, very edge case things, like automation and like making that stuff move into the normal development cycle is a much better way to go.
Yeah, I would say personally, it's something as a feature engineer, something which made me pay more attention to the reliability of the platform and observability was being on call. And I know we'll probably talk about this later, but when you're personally being woken up by alarms, that really makes you interested in them. So it's important that it's not just the SRE team who is going on call and then the people who are writing the feature code never hear about the problems. That really made us all accountable.
I think we should move on to that question, because I know that was quite an interesting topic that we spoke about before we jumped onto this panel discussion, and it's how best you do that kind of 24/7 part of DevOps, and in other words, like getting people on permanent standby. I know that was something that you're really interested to discuss, and our panel, our audience probably want to hear about that too.
Yeah, I'd like to lead on that if I may. And I don't really have the answer. I think that we're in a space where we're looking at that right now. So, you know, in this modern world where engineers are responsible for code in production, with that comes this responsibility that if something breaks at 3 a.m, they could get woken up. Now, right now, they're not, because we have first line and second line teams in place, and they fix. I mean, we're pretty stable. It's only really big things that go wrong, but they do sort out quite a lot of chaff. You know, they just sort of restart things and just edge things out until tomorrow. But, and only at the like sort of, when it's desperate, do we start to pull engineers out. But more and more and more, the team that have built that service or that system or that app are going to be woken up in the middle of the night if something goes wrong. Now, there's lots of issues with that. So we have to look at things like contracts, because no one's contracted. I think there's some vague wording in there, but the expectation isn't really that they're going to get woken up in the morning, but now they may do. Then we have to think about remuneration. So if somebody is woken up out of bed and they're just 5 minutes and they go back to sleep, how do you reward that? If they're up all night, how do you reward that? Is time off in lieu enough, or do you actually need to give them money, which in the current climate is not very appealing? So I have more questions than answers around this, and I'm really interested in what you guys have to say.
Yeah, so I'm actually on call right now, so it would be very ironic if something, if I was paged right now. Let's hope not. But yeah, so when we introduced on call at Condé a few years ago, it was important to our director of engineering at the time that it was a paid thing, and so I personally, when I'm on call, I get paid for the whole week of being on call, even if I'm not called out, because being on call has a human impact to you. You're always on edge. You have to take your laptop with you wherever you go. You can't take the tube for long periods of time in case you can't get Wi-Fi. So it's also an opt-in rota. So you have to respect that not everyone is able to go on call. Some people have family responsibilities or things which make it impossible to go on call, and that's fine. But the fact that it's paid kind of incentivizes it, so that it's actually something that people want to do if they want to have extra money. And usually, I don't want to jinx things, but like there aren't that many issues that makes it extremely unpleasant, depending on the week. And when there are issues, you're incentivized to fix them because you're personally being woken up for those. Yeah.
Funny enough, it's probably, if there were loads of issues, you could actually put people on shift and they know they're on the night shift and they're going to deal with what comes up. But actually, it's really frustrating when, actually I was looking at the stats today, in terms of sort of P1s and P2s, we have 2 or 3 or 4 a month tops, and P1s are like once every couple of months. So that's extremely frustrating to, as you say, have your life put on hold and probably never get called. And also when we look around, you know, whenever something does go wrong, it's generally, you know, I'm making some names up here, but Dave or Sarah, who always know how to get the system started, and you can't put them constantly, you know, those two people, because if you just put Alan on instead of Dave, he's still going to ring Dave. So there's so many challenges in that space for me. I'm not quite sure how we best solve it.
Yeah, so I'll just say quickly that one of the things which makes me feel more confident going on call is the run books that people write for their applications. So even if it's not the service that I'm most familiar with, I'll easily be able to identify errors. And something that was introduced by our site reliability engineering team, which was really cool and impactful, was on-call university. So before you entered the rota for going on call, you had to graduate on-call university, which is essentially a 2-hour session run by the site reliability engineers about how to use pager duty, what do you do when there's an incident, what are your responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera. And that generally makes me and other people feel a lot more confident going on call.
Love the sound of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. At a couple previous companies, we would make sure to do fire drills, which sounds like they would slot in very well with on-call university. I like that. But I think like fire drills or like chaos monkey, like that sort of thing can, get you to a point where you are making sure that that stuff is built in, that everybody knows how to build reliability in, and actually, the other aspect, which I don't think we touched on yet, is actually the incident management side of it, which is the reviewing of when an incident happens, going through that report and making sure that, first of all, it's a blameless retro and all of that. Like there's lots of guidelines online for how to do that properly, but making sure that you're actually following up on it, which I think can often be the downfall of some of the live ops teams, where if they're so stuck in firefighting mode that they never get to a point where they can do some of the remediation that comes out of some of these incident reports, like that can cause a lot more pain, because then it probably means you're going to be getting woken up more often and stuff like that. And I think, as Michelle mentioned, if you're the one who's writing a feature and you're the one who's going to get woken up at 3 a.m., you're definitely incentivized to make sure that that feature is more robust. But that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. That doesn't mean there's not going to be bugs and things like that. So having the right process in place, especially with regard to remediation of incidents, can really be helpful. And I think this is where like observability and things like that come into play, where it's really important that feature teams themselves understand what metrics they need to put out there, and that infrastructure teams, if they're the ones owning the, rollout of, I don't know, whatever metric system you're using, that they make it easy for the feature teams to add whatever metrics that they need. Yeah, I think the original question was around like on-call teams and how to make people feel okay about being on call. And one thing that we didn't mention yet is shadow rotations, where like if you actually have, like Jeremy, you mentioned people who aren't quite up to speed on one of the services. So run books, as Michelle mentioned, absolutely a must in that case. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, I would say having a shadow rota where you have 2 people getting called at the same time, where maybe one is the expert and one is not so well versed in that area, but that they're both going to be expected to come online and troubleshoot. And that way the shadow can actually learn. And over time, hopefully they'll be able to move over to, be the expert rotation there.
So I'd like to add one thing. You mentioned remediation, which I think is super important, because the end game here is to have a system that is stable, really. Everything else is just sticky plaster. One thing that we did in April, so it's been running for a little while now, is every new ticket that gets added to any backlog is tagged with one of 3 tags, which is either innovation, which is, I think, obvious. It's product development, so it's new features, the way you're growing the product out. Optimization, so that's things which actually work, but you can make them better. So performance improvements, for example. And finally, maintenance, which are things like either responding to incidents or deep diving a problem or actually resolving them. And we're just beginning to get the data out now. And it's been one of the most useful things that we have done, because you're now able to look at a backlog and say, what kind of tickets are coming into a backlog? And if you're getting lots of maintenance, you know you have issues. Then look at the state of the backlog. And again, if you have lots and lots of, we have red, amber, and green. So red and amber are optimization and maintenance. If you've got lots of red and amber and some green, you need to go and address that. And then you look at the tickets that are being done, moved to done. And again, the same thing. If you're moving loads of innovation tickets, but not touching your optimization and maintenance, that shows you you're not looking after your tech debt very well. And that just gives you a snapshot of product quality. But it also helps with the negotiations with products. When they want that new button, you can say to them, but we also need to do these things, because otherwise there are breaks.
Yeah, we did something like that at my last job, but we categorized it even more granularly after a little while, because we found that, it wasn't necessarily that all of the maintenance tickets or all of the remediation tickets would be of one type, but that if they were one of maybe 5 types, we would see a pattern emerge of, this one particular type of maintenance ticket keeps recurring. So what can we do to actually prevent that one from continuously popping up? Because if that's where the majority of our team's time was sunk, then we would want to actually fix that and maybe automate it or whatever the solution might be, just to free up the team's time a little bit. I had another thought, but I forgot what it is. So
I like the idea though. Very good. Yep.
Trying to prioritize tech debt versus feature tickets is the eternal struggle of software development. One thing that's helped with us is that I keep talking about the SRE team because they're amazing and very helpful. And for us, they kind of act like shepherds of the whole process. So while we might, we partake in postmortems, of if there are incidents, they will facilitate. We have to log tickets after there's an incident, but SRE will follow up if it's not complete, or and say have the actions being completed, and that has been very helpful.
Yeah, metrics are the king, really, when it comes to those negotiations. That's what we're finding. Now we've got stats. We say, did you see this?
Michelle, you reminded me of what I was thinking of. So that eternal struggle of product versus like tech debt and all that. One of the things that I started to say is like, we shouldn't call it tech debt anymore. Like that term is banned, because when we say that, it tends to completely obfuscate what the actual value of the work is. And so at my previous company, we started talking about things in the terms of value of the work. So is the value a customer value? Like, does this mean we'll have fewer incidents? Or is the value some sort of developer efficiency thing where once we institute this, the infrastructure team will suddenly have 40% less fires to put out, so that they can actually focus on some of their features and infrastructure as code things. And that really helped with having the roadmap conversation, because it basically brings it away from a technical discussion and into the language of the product manager, because it is about business value rather than about something that's broken.
I really like that idea. So I had festering in the back of my head here somewhere, I wanted to do something like that, because we give story points to tickets, which are sort of broadly equivalent to effort, but that's not really very interesting or very valuable. You're absolutely right. It's, well, what does this deliver? And you could almost put a story point on it for value. Say this is a 20, which is like really super valuable. This is only a 1, and that must help with the prioritization.
Something else that worked for us in terms of being able to prioritize tech debt tickets is we created this meeting, which was every 2 weeks, for people working on the common product, and it was called Sustainable Development. And it was called Sustainable Development because if you say tech debt, if it's a tech debt meeting, it kind of people shut down. But we kind of branded it as Sustainable Development, and the things that we talked about in that meeting and actions that came out of that meeting are the things that enable us to continue to sustainably develop features on our platform. It sounds
I love
more
that
impressive.
expression. Very nice. Yep.
Yeah, you can borrow it. Sustainable development.
I've already stolen it. It's gone.
People are actually, we discovered that other teams in the company with other sustainable development meetings started springing up around the company. So it's catching on.
Can I ask you a question about that? So one thing we also do is, and we don't do it enough, we want to do more, is team health, just regular surveys and finding out. And it happens in pockets, but we're not as good. But I'm wondering how doing that stuff feeds into the happiness of the team. So if you're having these sustainable development meetings, and then my life as an engineer gets easier, are you seeing that reflected in team health?
Generally, yes. I mean, it kind of, for us, it fulfilled the purpose of someone has a strong feeling about an ES-lint rule and it bothers them and it upsets them every day when they write code.
Bike shedding all the way.
Yeah, here's a place where you can go and make your case and get that prioritized as a card. Yeah, so I know that on the project that I work on at the moment, they've actually engaged the UX team to do UX interviews with developers who are working on the platform to see how happy they are with the platform, to like rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 and name their pain points. So I assume they're going to do that on an ongoing basis to sort of benchmark. But I think other signs of health would be how quick are pull requests being reviewed and merged, how often pull requests being held up in bike shedding conversations. And if that's very long, then perhaps it's a sign that you need to have some kind of semi-regular chat about these things.
I think we have a question from Andreas. He wants to know if you have any experience with error budgets and how well your kind of management accepts that.
I was having that very conversation today, as it happens. We don't yet. We're doing a lot of work around collecting metrics across our whole tech organization, because we have some metrics, but on the whole, it's quite opinion based. So we're saying metrics are the way to go. We've done a lot of work over the last 4 or 5 months on that. And today we were looking at our errors, various errors. And really, we don't have any kind of sense of budgeting, but we definitely want to. And the conversation we're having right now is, well, who are the best people to set that? Is it, our exec? Is it the tech leadership? Is it the engineers themselves? So it's definitely something that we want to do, but we're not quite there yet.
So I worked on implementing some of that in the past, and I think it works really well because it ties in so perfectly with alerting. And so you can say, we're not firing an alert if it's below this threshold. So that means people aren't woken up, which makes the engineers very happy who are on call. But the flip side of it is you have to make sure you tune those error budgets, because if the thing that makes the engineer happy makes the customer really unhappy, then you're not setting yourself up for success. So you have to find the right balance. And I find that making sure that that is always a conversation that includes the product manager or whoever actually owns that conversation with your customers is super important. Another thing that I found to be quite helpful in the past, and actually I'm talking about implementing something like this right now for my team, is what's called a service catalog. And so this is something that if you're working on trying to set up SLOs, it can also be helpful because, let's say you have some analytics in place that are customer facing, but they're not actually something that, needs to be in real time or something like that. Like you could say, well, that's not something I want to wake someone up for. And as long as everyone who's a stakeholder signs off and they're keeping the customer's interests at heart, then that's probably okay. But if you end up getting, suddenly you implement that particular error budget where you're not going to alert if that particular service goes down out of hours, and all of your customer support tickets are just complaints about not being able to access that, then you probably made a mistake. And so I think if you're going to implement any sort of error budget, whether it's automated or not, or part of a service catalog, like you should make sure that you have a review process built in. Oh, and I didn't explain the service catalog. So that's basically like all of the things that your service does, or it could be all of the things that your team does. That's a service for other teams, which I found, like, you know, with site reliability engineering or infrastructure teams, that's quite a popular way to go about it, because it's not quite like ticketing, but it's kind of like a light version of that, where we can say this type of service gets this type of support, or this type of action in the service gets this SLO, or, you know, this alert level, because the PM said that it's really, really important. So I think kind of having a combination of those things for whatever your service happens to be is a very good way to think about it, as long as there's a review process.
Yeah, I did that before at an investment bank. We put that in place, and the layer that we added on as well was also some kind of impact analysis, like proper. So you have a little system that starts to run slowly or goes down, and everyone just shrugs their shoulders because it's a little system. But when you understand the relationships that actually upstream or downstream, there is actually a financial impact or some other kind of impact, and that really helped with all of that analysis as well.
We've got another question from Peter. He wants to know if you have any thoughts on the future of work within remote SRE teams now that everyone can work anywhere. Where are some hidden local gems to discover, you know, people within that space?
I mean, I can go again if you like. Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I think in tech, everybody's remote right now. So I'm seeing a huge trend in companies saying, you know what, we're looking at this policy. We used to say we never work from home. We don't allow remote workers. But now a lot of companies are specifically saying, you know what, yes, this is now an option. Like at Improbable, we've said, because of COVID, we're going to be working from home until January at least, and then it's going to be a review process to see, you know, what's going on with that, and also we're looking at, you know, what does this mean as far as flexible working in general. And so it's definitely, I think, opening up a lot more, whereas previously I've encountered lots of companies who have said absolutely not, there's no way we'll ever do that, we're not equipped, blah blah blah, when turns out we probably are.
What I'm seeing is it's a senior cultural thing. So, you know, your person who sits upstairs somewhere on a big desk just goes, what's this working from home thing? They're just skiving. But now it's been thrown upon us. We've proved it not only works, actually we're more efficient, we're producing more, it's better, it's more stable. So it's very, very much accepted now. You touched on flexible working. I'm not seeing an appetite for sort of picking my time. Yeah, because I think there's you miss a lot of collaboration and being around at the same time. But certainly where you work, we don't care anymore. I've got somebody in Mauritius right now. I've got some people in Europe. I've got people all over the UK. I don't care. Just do the work.
Yeah, I think the flexibility is more around, like, you do have to be conscious of time zones with that. And also like people's personal circumstances, which especially during COVID and everything else that's going on in the world, like mental health has to take more of a front seat. And like, I think companies are not able to ignore that side of things like they may be used to. So I think it's much more positive than it was, for sure.
I completely agree with that. I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think we're very well set up for that, because we've not had to do it very much before. So that is very new for us. Whereas remote working, you know, we've got offshore centers and nearshore centers. It's the same, you know, so it's fine.
Amazing. So I'll move on to some of the topics that I know all of you wanted to discuss as well. And in particular, what kind of initiatives have been most effective in your organisation to educate feature developers on cloud infrastructure and empower them to set up services themselves?
Yeah, so I think I've touched on pretty much all of these, but I would say the things that were most effective to get me interested in cloud platform and feeling empowered to build things myself were being on call, doing on-call university, game days, like fire drills for when things go wrong, being involved with P1 incidents, and starting to explore different areas of the platform because of that. Also, the internal tech talks from people on the cloud platform team, giving a Kubernetes 101 to everyone, sometimes writing blogs for our company blog, or giving external talks where we could hear more about the ins and outs of how cloud platform is set up at Condé Nast. All of those things have done a lot to educate me personally and make me feel more empowered.
Yeah, I just echo everything you have said. And I think I say this a lot because I want us to be really good. I don't think we do enough of that stuff, you know, and I'm not even sure if we did twice as much as we're doing, it's enough. You can never really do enough of that stuff because you want everybody to be really well-rounded and not shocked when they're exposed to something brand new. Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said.
Actually, adding one more, I would say the rotations that I mentioned earlier has done a lot to bring cloud knowledge into the feature teams. People who spend 3 months in the cloud platform team, they come back and it's not only that they have that knowledge, but it's also infectious. And also, I would say, like actually giving infrastructure tasks to product teams first before giving them, just giving them to the cloud teams, at least gives people the opportunity to try and to try and figure it out. And if the cloud platform team is available for pairing on that and to help share the knowledge, that is impactful.
Yeah, and I think the thought I had in my head there was, I agree, again, I agree with everything you say, but I think a product person, like a product manager who wants the product to be grown, I think would look at that and say, that effort that you're putting in is not really delivering my new shiny thing that I want. So a lot of this is around, you know, collaboration and communication, not just amongst engineering teams, but amongst delivery teams and product teams as well. Comes back to the value thing, I think.
And then I know when we were speaking before, you were looking at the flip side of that and how best you kind of manage the cross-pollination of DevOps best practices between the hardcore infrastructure people who spend all of their time looking at the tin, as you called it, Jeremy, and engineers who deploy code into production environments. Yeah,
so I think we touched on this earlier, where I think even if you go back 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, you had a lot of specialist people who sat there and they did infrastructure, and engineers didn't really go near it, pretty much. I'm being dramatic, but that's pretty much what happened, because they were the experts, and often quite highly paid experts as well. And now there's just this bigger sense of all of us, whether, you know, no matter what we're doing, whether we're engineering, or whether we're product, or whether we're delivery, we're all just delivering value to the customer, and we do whatever we can to make that real. And that means looking, you know, doing infrastructure as code, for example. That's really only been a thing for what, 5, 6, 7 years, maybe, I'm guessing. But now it's what everybody does. Everybody spins up Docker. Everybody spins up, you know, their own servers. Everyone spins up Lambda functions. And we are taking much more care and responsibility for what is out there. But I think, touching on what Michelle was talking about, there's a lot of education that's needed, because yeah, if you have only ever done, for example, HTML, you're a web developer, you've done CSS and a bit of JavaScript, you've probably never even touched all of that stuff. So having people inside the pure infrastructure type teams who are really open, really friendly, really able to be inclusive, to talk to people, to show them, to move around, join engineering teams, I think is the way forward.
Yeah, I also feel like lots of feature engineers want to learn DevOps infrastructure skills. Like, we have an appetite for it because it feels powerful. It's like it's a very marketable, lucrative skill to have in your life, and people want to have the opportunity to learn these things because it's exciting and useful.
I completely agree. CV++, we call that. So, you know, everyone is trying to make their CV better, to be more fully rounded, so they can go and get the next big thing. And I fully embrace that. I actually say to people that join our company, I want you to leave in 2 years' time and earn twice as much money. And if you do that, it means you've come here and you've grown, you've delivered value, and you're now bigger and better as a result.
I almost did the mute thing again. I'm conscious of time, and I know that we're going to start the live networking session from 8, but I would like to answer some of the questions that are coming in from our audience before we switch off to do that. One in particular is from Wayne, who finds that adoption of tech can be as challenging as the engineering itself. So how do you tackle that?
I think that it is an exceptionally difficult problem, but the big thing is making sure that, you know, just as if you were trying to get customer adoption, you need to make sure that you're tackling like your internal customers, essentially, other teams that you're expecting to be using the tech. You need to approach them as if they are your customers externally, because I've seen so many times when infrastructure teams, pretty much every place I've ever worked has done something like this, where they're like, oh, you're gonna use this thing because it's cool. But that's not good enough. Like, it needs to solve a problem. So if your infrastructure team starts off by hearing a problem that exists in a different development team, and they're like, oh, we'll solve that, it's cool, but then there's no more feedback loop, there's no more engagement, you know, at some point you're probably going to lose the original intention, or miss out on something entirely that you're supposed to be solving for. So just treat your internal customers as if they are external customers, and if you really understand what the problems that they are having and like what their ultimate end goal is, then you should be able to kind of build something to that value proposition that's going to work for them. And then you don't have to do much effort to get adoption, because you're solving a problem that they actually want solved. And I'd say just beyond that, like, you know, sit down with them, make sure you're communicating in the way that they want to be communicated with, because if you're sending emails but none of the feature teams read emails, that's not going to be effective. You know, if you do something like maybe a hackathon on the new thing that you're building, that might be interesting to some, but maybe other teams might not have enough time to do that. So you probably have to be creative with it, but I would say try to figure out what they want and build to that, so that you're actually solving the right problem.
So the way we've tackled it is with the RFC process. So we have decided that what we don't want is the Wild West, where anyone can come, bring the latest funky language or tool with them, slap down some code and leave in 6 months' time, because then we're left with unsustainable code. So we have an RFC process. So it makes sense from a financial point of view, from a learnability point of view, if actually you have some consistency and some standards. So we lay those standards down, but there is a process where if you've got something new that you want to introduce, there is a process where you can open up the RFC, which is request for comments. You can change it. You can put it around to your peers for comment when you're happy that it's right. It's actually just a Git document, and you make a pull request. It gets reviewed by a panel of people. If we look at it and say that's very sensible, that's now the new standard, then that's the new standard. And everyone adheres to those RFCs. We make people read them as part of the induction, as part of the onboarding. We regularly talk about them. It's a very open and inclusive process. And as a result, we have cost efficiencies. People can move around teams and understand, excuse me, we get sustainable, consistently built software. And it just really works so well.
Farah, I know there's one question in particular that you wanted to answer.
Oh, just the one about what are the differences between the dev and beta and production. I really wanted to talk about this because I think it's super important to the I think it's super important to the conversation around like DevOps and software. And like since the beginning of my career, I've seen a lot around the mindset shift that has to take place between you know, types of software development. So moving from box product development to agile development, that's, you know, continuous delivery sort of thing, as well as when you're moving from, you know, when you're when whatever product you're building is like an experiment, and then it's alpha and then beta, and you're adding more and more customers to it, and then eventually it becomes live production. And what happens once it's in maintenance mode and you're actually, you know, live and you're making changes to it when it's live? Like there's a big difference in how you think about things there. Like and I think the best example of this is like when I was working on SQL Azure at Microsoft, and you know, we had to merge code bases with SQL Server, which was a box product and had a 4-year development lifecycle. And everybody who worked on it had a very waterfall mindset of approaching it, and they've been doing it for 20 years. And then in comes the SQL Azure folks who are like, well, we're trying to do agile development and we're literally building the cloud, and we want to do development in the way that our customers are going to do development on the cloud. So we need a much shorter release cycle. So like every 2 weeks or eventually continuous. And trying to get people to shift from that 4-year release cycle in waterfall to agile development, and then again to continuous development, was like pulling teeth. So it was really interesting, and like ultimately we found no amount of training or run books written were actually going to make people feel ready for that switch. And ultimately what had to happen was we just had to pull the trigger on it. And once they started doing it, they're like, oh, actually this works. And so like that was a really interesting shift. And the other one that I've seen is when engineers have only worked on things that were pre-production, so before it went live, and they didn't really think about problems in the same way when it came to things that usually fall under site reliability engineering. So, you know, how do you scale? What's going to be the customer experience when we do this deployment? And, you know, should we set feature flags and that sort of thing? And I think when we're talking about the mindset shift for engineers who might only work on feature teams, if those feature teams don't also do their own testing or aren't also on call, they're probably not thinking about these sorts of problems. And so helping them get there by doing the things that Michelle and Jeremy and I have said, like, I think that will help with that mindset shift, but it's still not going to necessarily get you there for once it's live. And you know, if you don't have on-call set up, if you don't have a service catalog or error budgets or all these other things that come wrapped up in that, you need to make sure that you're thinking about that before that go live date, and that you continue to think about it afterwards. And I think one of the main gotchas of, you know, we're doing development before production and then we're actually live is a lot of times people don't, if they haven't done that sort of release before, they are not thinking about what happens afterwards. So like, what happens in 2 weeks later when you want to do another release? Or, you know, are we doing continuous development? If we are, how do we test that and make sure it passes whatever acceptance criteria it needs to in order to actually go live? Anyway, I'm very passionate about that one, so.
Does anybody else have anything to add to that before we kind of move into the networking?
I'll just quickly reflect. I think we're in it feels to me like every product that we have is in this state of continuous delivery. We don't really have these, yeah, the Microsoft example you mentioned is quite big. I think it's also quite unique, really, in a way. You've got this like big, almost legacy code base, and along comes the agile kids and try to smash the two together. I think our products are in a different space where we are quite agile and it's continuously delivered. So yeah, I'm not sure I've got a view on that.
One thing that has helped us get in that mindset, I mean, I don't think we've had anything quite as extreme. I haven't experienced anything quite as extreme. But one initiative of the SRE team was to create a production readiness checklist, which is a requirement to go through before making any service live. And so that includes setting up the on-call rota, all the kinds of things that as a feature developer, if you haven't done that before, you might not know. So highly recommend.
2 thumbs up on that, because that is like absolutely a must.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think we need to kind of wrap this up and move into the networking, where I'm sure if all of you are joining us, that there will be, you know, an option for people joining the networking to ask you anything further that we haven't been able to cover tonight. It's been a really, really insightful evening, and for, like I've mentioned, Lucy has been sharing the link on the side to the virtual networking. She's just shared it again for anybody joining us on that. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us this evening. We're really, really excited to see where Women in DevOps is heading next. Also, don't forget the link to get your t-shirt and sign up to the prize that Ari mentioned. We have launched our August newsletter, so you can check that out on our website, which is really straightforward, www.womenindevops.com. And that's about it from us. So I will sign in to hopefully see you all on the networking session.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to us.
Thank you.
Thanks for your insights.
Bye.